History class lied to you. Schools were never about quiet learning and polite students. They were battlegrounds. A bad glass of wine once killed 60 people at Oxford. Medical students paid tuition with corpses they dug up themselves. And one poet brought a bear to Cambridge just to prove a point. These are 33 facts about schools and universities so stupid, so chaotic, and so unbelievable that no teacher would ever put them on a test. Your education is about to get a serious upgrade. 1. In the early 1800s, Trinity College at Cambridge University had a strict rule: absolutely no dogs allowed on campus. Now, most students would just accept this and move on with their lives. But the poet Lord Byron was not most students. He was a dramatic, rule-bending genius who looked at that policy and thought, well, they did not say anything about bears. So he went out and got himself a tame bear. He walked it around campus on a leash, fed it in his room, and when the administration came knocking, Byron simply pointed out that the rulebook mentioned dogs, cats, and various other animals, but bears? Complete silence on the bear issue. The university was stumped. There was genuinely no rule against bears because, frankly, why would there be? Legend says Byron even suggested they should give his bear a fellowship. The bear stayed. 2. Medical schools in the 1700s and 1800s had a massive problem. They needed dead bodies to teach anatomy, but legally obtaining corpses was nearly impossible. Only the bodies of executed criminals were officially available, and there simply were not enough murderers being hanged to meet the demand. Enter the entrepreneurial medical student. Many young men studying to become doctors paid their tuition not with money, but with freshly dug up corpses. They would sneak into graveyards at night, dig up the recently buried, and deliver them to their professors. It was so common that families started guarding graves or building iron cages called mort safes over them. Some students even formed organized gangs called resurrection men. Picture that: future doctors, the people sworn to save lives, moonlighting as professional grave robbers just to afford their education. 3. The students at Massachusetts Institute of Technology have a long tradition of elaborate pranks they call hacks. But in 1994, they pulled off something legendary. One morning, campus security looked up at the Great Dome, the iconic centerpiece of the university, and saw a complete campus police car sitting on top of it. Inside the car was a dummy dressed as a police officer, holding a box of donuts. The car had working lights. It even had a parking ticket on the windshield. How did they get a car up there? They did not lift it. They disassembled the entire vehicle piece by piece, carried every single part up to the dome, and then reassembled it on the roof overnight. The engineering precision required was genuinely impressive. MIT officials were not even mad. They were actually kind of proud. 4. In 1355, two students from Oxford University walked into a tavern called Swindlestock and ordered some wine. They tasted it, decided it was garbage, and told the tavern keeper exactly what they thought. The keeper responded with insults. The students responded by throwing the wine in his face. And then, somehow, this petty argument about drink quality escalated into one of the bloodiest town versus gown riots in history. The St Scholastica Day riot lasted for 3 days. Townspeople armed with bows and axes attacked students. Students fought back with swords and whatever they could find. By the end, over 60 people were dead. 60 people. Because some guy served bad wine and could not handle criticism. For the next 500 years, the town of Oxford was forced to pay the university an annual fine and publicly apologize every single year on the anniversary. 5. Pythagoras, the ancient Greek philosopher famous for that triangle theorem you definitely remember from school, ran his own academy with some truly strange rules. The most famous one? Absolutely no beans. His students were strictly forbidden from eating beans, especially fava beans. Why? Well, Pythagoras had some wild theories. Some historians say he believed beans contained the souls of the dead, and eating them was basically cannibalism of ghosts. Others claim he thought beans resembled human embryos, or that the hollow stems were pathways for souls traveling between Earth and the underworld. There are even stories that Pythagoras died because he refused to escape through a bean field when enemies were chasing him. He would rather face death than step on a bean. Whether that story is true or not, the bean ban was absolutely real, and his followers took it dead seriously. 6. The University of Virginia was founded by Thomas Jefferson with high ideals about education and enlightenment. The reality of its early years was more like the Wild West. Students regularly showed up to lectures armed with pistols, and they were not afraid to use them. In the 1820s and 1830s, the campus saw multiple shootings. Students shot at professors they disagreed with. They shot at each other over insults. One professor was actually killed by a student in 1840. The atmosphere got so bad that faculty members considered resigning en masse. Thomas Jefferson himself, in his final years, had to personally intervene to calm things down. Imagine going to a university where disagreeing with your professor's interpretation of philosophy might end with someone pulling out a gun. Makes complaining about early morning classes seem pretty trivial. 7. British boarding schools like Eton and Harrow had a charming tradition called the fagging system that lasted well into the 20th century. Here is how it worked. Younger students were assigned to older students as personal servants. And when I say servants, I mean actual unpaid labor. These young boys, called fags, had to wake up early to make toast for their seniors, polish their shoes, run errands across campus at any hour, and perform whatever tasks their masters demanded. One particularly disgusting duty? Warming up toilet seats on cold mornings by sitting on them so the older student would not have to experience a cold seat. This was not hazing that the school ignored. This was an official, institutionally sanctioned system. Schools defended it as character building. Apparently, the character they were building was either total obedience or seething resentment. 8. In March 1939, a Harvard freshman named Lothrop Withington Jr. swallowed a live goldfish on a dare. He did it to win a $10 bet. That single act of stupidity sparked an absolute craze that swept across American universities. Suddenly, college students everywhere were competing to swallow the most goldfish. The record climbed absurdly fast. Someone would swallow 20, then another student would do 40, then someone claimed 89. Students were buying out pet stores. Goldfish populations on campuses dropped dramatically. The Massachusetts legislature actually considered a bill to protect the goldfish. Animal rights groups protested. Medical professionals warned about parasites and diseases. And what stopped this ridiculous fad? World War II. The war started, students had bigger concerns, and the goldfish swallowing epidemic quietly ended. An entire national craze, lasting months, involving thousands of fish, all because one guy wanted $10. 9. The imperial examination system in ancient China, known as keju, was the gateway to power and prestige. Pass the exam, become an official, change your entire family's fortune, fail, and you return to poverty, no pressure. Candidates were locked in tiny individual cells, barely big enough to sit in, for up to 3 days straight. They had to write essays, compose poetry, and demonstrate mastery of classical texts. They could not leave for any reason. They brought their own food, water, and a chamber pot. The stress was so intense that candidates regularly went insane during the exam. Some had mental breakdowns, some died from exhaustion or illness right there in their cells. And when someone died, guards simply lifted the body over the wall to remove it, then continued supervising everyone else. Those remaining just kept writing, with a corpse being tossed out nearby. 10. Getting a cow onto a roof became a legendary prank at schools and universities throughout the 1800s and even into the 1900s. The method was surprisingly practical, if labor-intensive. Students would find a cow, usually borrowed without permission from a nearby farm, and let it up a staircase or use ramps and pulleys. Cows, being cows, will walk upstairs if you guide them properly. The problem is their anatomy. Cows can navigate stairs going up because they lean forward naturally, but going down requires them to lean back in a way their bodies simply cannot manage. They panic and freeze. So once that cow was on the roof, it was staying on the roof. Getting it down required cranes, elaborate rigging, or sometimes butchering the animal on the spot. All this chaos because students discovered a simple biological fact and thought, this is hilarious. 11. During the medieval period, students at universities like Oxford and Cambridge enjoyed an extraordinary legal privilege. They were considered members of the clergy. This meant that if a student committed a crime, even a serious one like assault or murder, they could not be tried in regular courts. Instead, they faced ecclesiastical courts run by the church. The church courts were notoriously lenient. Punishments might include penance, fines, or brief confinement in comfortable conditions. A student could literally stab someone and face little more than extra prayers and maybe some community service. This immunity, called benefit of clergy, made townspeople absolutely furious. They watched students cause chaos, hurt people, and walk away with minimal consequences, while ordinary citizens would hang for the same crimes. This double standard fueled centuries of violent conflict between students and local residents. 12. In 1766, Harvard students had enough. The butter served in the dining hall was not just bad. It was rancid, putrid, genuinely disgusting. Students complained to the administration and were ignored. So they escalated. They began disrupting meals, refusing to eat, and causing general chaos in the dining hall. The situation got so bad that one student, Asa Dunbar, grandfather of the famous writer Henry David Thoreau, stood up and delivered an impassioned speech declaring the butter unfit for human consumption. The rebellion spread. Students broke windows, damaged property, and openly defied college authorities. Harvard's response? They expelled Dunbar and several other ringleaders. Not for lying. The butter was genuinely terrible. They were expelled for having the audacity to complain about it publicly. The Butter Rebellion became a famous early example of student protest in American history. 13. The Agoge was the brutal training program that turned Spartan boys into the warriors everyone still talks about today. Starting at age 7, boys were taken from their families and placed in military barracks. One key element of training: deliberate starvation. The state provided minimal food on purpose, forcing boys to steal to survive. But here is the twist. Stealing was encouraged as a skill, but getting caught was severely punished. Not because stealing was wrong, but because getting caught meant you were bad at it. A famous story tells of a Spartan boy who stole a fox, hid it under his cloak, and let the animal claw his stomach open rather than reveal the theft. He died from the wounds, still silent. True or not, the Spartans held him up as a hero. The lesson was clear. Success matters, competence matters. Getting caught is shameful. 14. Yale University had a tradition called bladder ball that started in the 1950s. The concept was simple. A massive 6-foot inflatable ball was released into a crowd of students, and teams tried to push it toward opposite goals. That was it. No real rules. No referees. Just hundreds of students pushing a giant ball wherever they could. Naturally, this turned into complete mayhem every single year. Students trampled each other. Windows got smashed. Cars were damaged. The ball would roll through streets, disrupting traffic and destroying property. In 1982, the game got so out of control that administrators officially banned it. But students, being students, kept trying to revive it. In 2009, someone brought a new ball to campus, and within minutes, chaos erupted again. The ball was stabbed and deflated by authorities. Yale really cannot have nice things. 15. The dunce cap, that tall, pointed hat teachers made stupid kids wear in old movies, has an origin story that is completely backwards. It was named after John Duns Scotus, a medieval philosopher considered one of the greatest minds of his era. His followers, called dunsmen, wore pointed caps because they believed the shape channeled knowledge from heaven into the brain, like a funnel for divine wisdom. For a while, these hats were symbols of intellectual elite. But times change. When the Renaissance arrived, new thinkers mocked the old scholastic philosophers as outdated fools. The dunsmen and their pointy hats became jokes. By the 1500s, calling someone a dunce meant calling them an idiot. The hat transformed from a badge of genius to a symbol of stupidity. Imagine being so thoroughly mocked by history that your intellectual movement's fashion statement becomes shorthand for moron. 16. From 1712 to 1914, the University of Heidelberg in Germany had its own student prison, called the Studentenkarzer. When students broke rules through drinking, dueling, or general misbehavior, they were sent there instead of facing regular authorities. The cells were surprisingly comfortable. Students could continue attending classes, receive visitors, and order food and beer from outside. But the best part? The walls. Generations of imprisoned students covered every surface with graffiti, drawings, poetry, and self-portraits. Being sent to the Studentenkarzer became a badge of honor. Students deliberately broke rules just to get locked up and add their mark to the walls. A stay in the prison became a rite of passage, something to brag about rather than feel ashamed of. Today, the prison is a museum, its walls a chaotic masterpiece of 2 centuries of student rebellion. 17. Before Napoleon Bonaparte conquered Europe, he was just an awkward Corsican kid at the military academy in Brienne, France. He was short, spoke French with a heavy accent, and did not fit in with the wealthy French aristocrats around him. But he was brilliant at strategy. One winter, the school held a snowball fight, and young Napoleon was chosen as one of the team leaders. While other kids just threw snow randomly, Napoleon treated it like an actual military campaign. He organized his team into disciplined units, ordered them to build snow forts and trenches, and developed coordinated attack strategies. His side absolutely dominated. The snowball fight became legendary at the school, an early glimpse of the tactical genius that would later reshape European history. All those future generals and aristocrats getting absolutely destroyed in a snowball fight by the weird foreign kid. 18. Medieval Ireland had a unique tradition for training poets and bards. Students at bardic schools did not sit in bright classrooms with books and lectures. Instead, they lay in complete darkness. The method worked like this. Students would receive a poetic topic or theme, then retreat to a dark room, sometimes with a heavy stone placed on their chest to aid concentration. They would lie there for hours, sometimes an entire day, composing verses entirely in their minds. Only after emerging from darkness would they recite what they had created. The belief was that darkness eliminated distractions and forced pure mental focus. The stone added physical discomfort that supposedly kept the mind sharp and prevented sleep. It sounds like torture, but these schools produced some of the most revered poets in Irish history. Apparently, great poetry requires suffering in the most literal sense. 19. Georgetown University has a beautiful clock tower called Healy Hall, and for decades, students made a tradition of stealing its clock hands. Not just once, repeatedly. The hands would disappear, the university would replace them, and then they would vanish again. But here is where it gets absurd. Students started mailing the stolen hands to the Pope in Vatican City. Why the Pope? Georgetown is a Catholic Jesuit university, so presumably students thought the Holy Father should know what time it was. The Vatican, to their credit, actually returned the hands on multiple occasions, probably very confused about why American college students kept sending them clock parts. The university eventually had to redesign the clock with hands that were either impossible to remove or simply not worth the effort of stealing. Divine intervention could not stop these thefts, but better engineering finally did. 20. Medieval universities had initiation rituals that make modern fraternity hazing look gentle. The process, sometimes called beaning or deposition, treated incoming freshmen as literal wild beasts who needed to be civilized. New students were called yellow beaks, or compared to animals with horns and rough fur. The ritual involved older students symbolically filing down the freshmen' horns and claws, sometimes using actual tools pressed against their heads and hands. They would pour water or wine over them to wash away their beastly nature. They pulled their ears, shaved their heads roughly, and subjected them to public humiliation. The whole ceremony supposedly transformed the wild newcomer into a proper human student. University authorities officially sanctioned these rituals. They were considered necessary for turning ignorant youths into civilized scholars. The bruises and trauma were just part of the educational experience. 21. In the early 1900s, tuberculosis was devastating populations worldwide, and doctors believed fresh air was the cure. This led to one of the strangest educational experiments in history: open-air schools. Children sat outside in all weather conditions, including freezing winter temperatures. In Germany, America, and Britain, students bundled in heavy coats, sat in specially designed sleeping bags, and tried to learn while snow fell on their desks. Teachers would find ink frozen solid in the morning. Students wore fingerless gloves so they could write, though their hands often went numb anyway. The theory was that cold outdoor air strengthened lungs and prevented disease. Whether it actually helped with tuberculosis is debatable, but it definitely created generations of children who associated education with being extremely cold and uncomfortable. 22. When the University of Bologna was founded in 1088, making it the oldest university in the Western world, it operated on a principle that seems completely backwards today. Students were in charge. Students formed organizations that hired and fired professors. If a professor started a lecture late, students fined him. If he ran over time, another fine. If he skipped material or taught poorly, he could lose his job. Professors had to put up deposits at the beginning of each year, and money was deducted for every infraction. They even needed student permission to leave the city. Imagine your professors having to ask the student body for a vacation day. This student-controlled model lasted for centuries and influenced how universities developed across Europe. The shift to professor-controlled institutions came later, and students have been complaining about it ever since. 23. The Eton Wall game is a sport that has been played at Eton College since at least 1766, and it might be the most pointless athletic competition ever invented. Two teams of 10 players each push against each other along a narrow strip beside a brick wall, trying to move a ball toward the opposing end. The rules are incredibly complex and nearly impossible to follow. Scoring an actual goal, called a shy, requires getting the ball to a specific spot and touching it with your foot while yelling, "Got it!" It almost never happens. An actual full goal worth 10 points requires the ball to hit a garden door at one end or a tree at the other. The last goal was scored in 1909. That is over a century of playing a sport where nobody scores. Yet Eton students keep playing it every year, covered in mud, gaining nothing. 24. At German universities in the 1800s and early 1900s, academic fencing was not just a sport. It was a social ritual with a bizarre goal: getting your face slashed. Students joined fencing fraternities and fought formal duels using sharp sabers aimed specifically at the face. They wore goggles and neck protection, but their cheeks and foreheads were deliberately exposed. The goal was not to win. It was to stand still, take a hit to the face, and walk away with a dramatic scar called a schmiss. These scars were marks of honor and courage. Students who flinched or dodged were considered cowards. Some men even rubbed salt or horsehair into their wounds to make the scars more prominent. Doctors who stitched the cuts neatly were unpopular. You wanted an ugly scar. It proved you could take pain without backing down. 25. New Haven, Connecticut, February 1854. A light snow had fallen on Yale's campus, and students began an innocent snowball fight. It did not stay innocent for long. The battle escalated rapidly, drawing in more and more participants. Snowballs turned into ice balls. Windows shattered. Students started targeting townspeople who fought back. Someone called the fire department, and when firefighters arrived, students pelted them with snow too. The firefighters turned their hoses on the students, which only made everyone angrier. Police were called. The chaos spread through city streets. Eventually, the mayor himself arrived and read the Riot Act, a literal legal proclamation ordering the crowd to disperse or face arrest. All this because some students threw snowballs on a winter afternoon. Property damage was significant. Several students were arrested. Yale banned large snowball fights for years afterward. 26. Cambridge University had a tradition for the student who achieved the lowest passing score on the mathematical Tripos examination, the wooden spoon. It was not a metaphor. Students actually presented the unlucky scholar with an enormous wooden spoon, sometimes 5 feet long or larger. The presentation became an elaborate public ceremony. The recipient would be paraded around, their spoon decorated with ribbons and inscriptions mocking their mathematical abilities. The spoons grew bigger and more ridiculous over the years as students tried to outdo previous ceremonies. Ironically, receiving the wooden spoon became almost prestigious in its own strange way. It meant you passed, barely, and got a memorable moment instead of quiet mediocrity. The tradition ended in 1909 when Cambridge changed how exam results were published, making it impossible to identify the lowest scorer. Some students were probably relieved. 27. For most of recorded history, being left-handed was considered wrong, unnatural, even evil. The Latin word for left, sinister, tells you everything about how people viewed it. Schools took this prejudice seriously. Left-handed children were forced to write with their right hands through any means necessary. Teachers would tie the left arm behind the child's back, strap it to their chair, or simply hit the left hand with a ruler every time the child tried to use it. Some schools used special devices that locked the left hand in place. Children who resisted faced public humiliation or physical punishment until they complied. This practice continued well into the 20th century, only declining in the 1960s and 1970s when educators finally accepted that forcing hand dominance caused psychological harm without any actual benefit. 28. Rutgers University and Princeton University have been stealing each other's canon for over 100 years, and neither side is ready to stop. It started in 1875 when Rutgers students snuck onto Princeton's campus and took a Revolutionary War cannon that Princeton displayed proudly. Princeton stole it back. Then Rutgers took it again. This went on for decades. Eventually, Princeton got so tired of the theft that they buried their cannon in concrete, with only the barrel visible. Problem solved? Not quite. Rutgers students once attempted to dig it out anyway. They also mounted raids on other Princeton property when the cannon proved impossible to steal. Rutgers, not to be outdone, buried their own cannon in concrete too. Now both schools have cannons permanently encased in stone, monuments to a rivalry so petty and persistent that it required literally cementing the objects in place. 29. All Souls College at Oxford University has one of the strangest traditions in academic history: the mallard hunt. According to legend, when workers were digging the college foundations in 1438, a giant mallard duck flew out of the excavation. To commemorate this extremely questionable event, the college holds a ceremony once every 100 years. The most recent hunt was in 2001, and the next will be in 2101. During the ritual, members of the college process through the buildings at night, carrying torches and sticks, singing the mallard song, and pretending to search for this legendary duck. A person dressed in a special chair is carried around as the Lord Mallard. They check every room, closet, and rooftop. They never find the duck because, obviously, it does not exist. The whole thing is gloriously absurd and taken completely seriously. 30. When you received a university diploma in medieval or early modern Europe, you were not just getting a piece of paper. You were getting an expensive luxury item. Diplomas were written on vellum, which is specially prepared animal skin, usually from sheep or calves. Preparing vellum was labor-intensive. The skin had to be cleaned, stretched, scraped, and dried. High-quality vellum was genuinely expensive. A single diploma might cost the equivalent of weeks of labor. Wealthy families displayed these diplomas prominently because they represented serious investment, not just academic achievement. The diploma itself was a status symbol showing you could afford real vellum. Paper diplomas came later and were initially seen as cheap alternatives. Today, most universities use fancy paper and call it tradition. But the original flex was animal skin so expensive it proved your family had money. 31. Several medieval religious schools and monasteries operated under strict rules of silence. Students were forbidden from speaking except during specific times. like answering questions in class or prayers. Communication happened through an elaborate system of hand signals. Need to ask for bread at dinner? There was a sign for that. Want to request a particular book? Another sign. Some monasteries developed hundreds of gestures covering every possible need. Breaking silence was punished with fasting, extra work, or physical discipline. The belief was that speech led to sin, gossip, arguments, and distraction from God. Silent contemplation was considered spiritually superior. Students spent years barely speaking, communicating only through gestures and written notes. Imagine going through your entire education where talking was treated as a moral failure rather than a basic human behavior. 32. Victorian-era schools in Britain, especially those serving working-class children, often resembled military training camps more than places of learning. Children spent hours each day practicing marching, drilling, and forming lines with military precision. They responded to whistle commands. They moved in unison. Strict physical discipline was constant. The actual academic content was basic: reading, writing, arithmetic, and religious instruction. Critical thinking was not encouraged. The system was explicitly designed to produce obedient workers and soldiers for the British Empire. Officials openly stated that schools should create disciplined, compliant citizens who would follow orders without question. Creativity and independent thought were seen as dangerous in lower-class children. The goal was not enlightenment. It was creating a population that could staff factories and fight wars without causing trouble. 33. At many American colleges in the 19th and early 20th centuries, students developed a ritual for the end of the academic year: the textbook funeral. As final exams ended and summer approached, students would gather their most hated books, particularly mathematics or Latin texts, and organize a formal funeral procession. They wore black, carried the books in small coffins, and marched solemnly across campus. Eulogies were delivered, mocking the texts and celebrating their demise. Then the books were buried or burned, sometimes with genuine headstones marking the grave. Some universities have photographs of these ceremonies, complete with weeping students performing exaggerated grief. It was cathartic, theatrical, and a shared acknowledgement that certain textbooks had caused genuine suffering. The ritual has mostly died out, though the sentiment behind it remains timeless. Centuries of academic tradition, and this is what we got: stolen cannons, frozen classrooms, and students hunting imaginary ducks. Now I need to settle something. Which historical school punishment would break you first? Getting your left hand tied behind your back for years, warming toilet seats for older students with your own body, or sitting in a Chinese exam cell while they throw corpses over the wall next to you? Pick one and defend your choice in the comments, like if your school suddenly seems less terrible. Subscribe if you want more proof that humanity has always been this unhinged.